Mary, 43, lived alone in a small apartment where the rain never stopped. One restless night, she downloaded Tinder, seeking a trace of warmth from a stranger's presence. Among hundreds of faces, one profile stood out. A blurred photo, eyes that seemed to pierce through the screen, marked only by a single letter, LL Ball. She swiped right. The screen went black. Silence swallowed the room. From that night on, the photo of Elle began to change each day, subtly reflecting the very room she lived in. When the police finally arrived, Mary's phone was still glowing on the floor, displaying only one message. "You've been chosen." Ah, parfait. A wall. Mary lived alone on the third floor, in an apartment whose windows were always sealed shut to keep out the endless rain that hammered the glass each night. Since the divorce, the place had grown colder, emptier, like even the walls had given up on warmth. She went to work, came home, ate something forgettable, and sat in silence with her phone. Everything followed the same tired rhythm, until the night she decided to download Tinder. The app opened like a floodgate, releasing a stream of unfamiliar faces. Mary swiped left, then right. Each motion came with a soft pop, a sound almost like breathing, pulling her gently out of the stillness. It felt new, almost comforting, as though the simple act of swiping could erase her loneliness. Dozens of photos passed by, artificial smiles, hollow eyes. She was about to close the app when one profile made her stop. The picture was blurred, veiled in a thin mist. A man stood in the shadows, with nothing but a vast darkness behind him. His face was indistinct, only the eyes were clear. That stare froze her, strange and familiar at the same time. Beneath the photo was a single letter, L. She hesitated for a few seconds, then swiped right. The screen flared white. It's a match. At that exact moment, her desk lamp flickered once, then went out. The room plunged into darkness. Mary looked around uneasy. Her familiar apartment suddenly felt different, as if a part of its light had been quietly stolen away. She exhaled, smiled faintly, convincing herself it was just a coincidence. The phone vibrated in her hand. A notification appeared. Elle sent you a message. No words, no emoji, only a single black dot. She tried to delete it, but the notification stayed. Locking the screen, she set the phone down on the table. In the hush of the room, the rain whispered against the windows, and beneath it, faintly, came another sound, like the soft drag of fingertips gliding across glass. Mary lifted her head, listening. Nothing. Then the screen lit up again. The photo of L had changed. He was no longer standing in the dark. Now he was in a small, dimly lit room, light spilling across a wooden table identical to hers. Her heart thudded. In the corner of the image, reflected in the glass, was the faint silhouette of a woman sitting across from the camera. Long hair, gray shirt, head bowed slightly. Mary turned the phone face down and stepped back. The rain kept falling, steady, relentless, each drop striking like a heartbeat, drowning out her fear. In the dark, the phone screen lit once more, its blue glow crawling across the table, flickering against the ceiling, pulsing like the breath of something waking up. Nah. Mary woke the next morning, caught between sleep and wakefulness. On the table, her phone was still glowing, Tinder open, though she was certain she had closed it the night before. The message icon pulsed again and again. She tapped it open. The inbox was empty. No profile named L, no saved conversation. But his photo was still there, sharper now, more defined. This time, the man stood before a window with faded floral curtains, exactly like the ones in her apartment. Mary tried deleting the app, but seconds later, the Tinder icon reappeared on her home screen, as if it had never left. A flicker of unease passed through her. She convinced herself it must be a software glitch. At work, she set the phone face down, yet the faint buzz of notifications persisted. Long, uneven vibrations, like the rhythm of a heart that didn't quite know how to beat. That night, she turned off the lights early. The rain outside was relentless. Somewhere in the apartment came a soft tapping against the window pane. 3 knocks, spaced apart. Mary sat up, pulse quickening. The air thickened until it felt like she was breathing through water. She approached the window, lifted the curtain. Only darkness. No movement. Then, behind her, the phone screen blinked to life, casting a thin blue glow that crawled across the ceiling. She turned. The profile photo of L had changed again. His face was now disturbingly clear, his smile stretched too wide. Wrong. Behind him, the same window, and a hand pressed against the glass at the exact spot where she had just been standing. Mary threw the phone onto the chair, yanked the power cord from the wall, and shut off every light. The room was swallowed whole by darkness. But beneath the rain, a new sound began to emerge, faint, deliberate. Swipe, swipe, swipe. The unmistakable rhythm of a finger sliding slowly across a screen. Everything in the apartment felt misaligned. The window was cracked open, though she hadn't touched it. The curtain swayed, but not with the wind. On the table, the screen flared once more, revealing a message she had never seen on Tinder before. "You're close." She backed away until her shoulders hit the wall. The swiping stopped. A long, heavy vibration followed. Then a sharp click. The sound of a photo being taken. The screen went black. Cold air flooded the room. When she finally dared to pick up the phone, a new image had been saved in her gallery. It was her, standing exactly where she was now. And in the reflection behind her, a man was smiling. Whoa. 3 days passed. Mary hadn't stepped outside once. She deleted Tinder again, changed every password, and locked her phone away in a drawer. Yet each time she walked by, she could still hear it. A faint, dragging sound, like fingertips sliding slowly across glass. Steady, patient. She told herself it was only in her head, until the drawer trembled softly, and from its crack leaked a dull blue light, pulsing like a heartbeat. When she opened it, the phone screen was already on. Tinder sat in the center, open and waiting, as if it had never been removed. The photo of had changed again. He was no longer standing in the shadows. Now he sat in a brighter room, hands resting on a wooden table, his eyes fixed directly on the camera. On the table in front of him was something familiar, a white ceramic mug with a hairline crack along its rim. The exact same mug Mary used every morning. She turned toward her own table. The mug was still there, but in the photo, it lay on its side, a spill of coffee spreading outward in the shape of a handprint. Her stomach tightened. She zoomed in. In the reflection, on the surface of the mug, a woman appeared. Messy hair, head bowed, shoulders trembling. The image was faint, but unmistakable. It was her. Mary's breath quickened. The apartment grew too quiet, too still. Then, click. The lights went out. Only the phone screen remained, washing the room in its sickly blue hue. A new image appeared, downloaded from nowhere. In it, L stood pressed against a wall. Behind him stretched a vertical smear of black, like a doorway to nothing. From the darkness, thin hands reached out, wrapping around his shoulders. Their nails were long, curved, glistening with something dark and wet. Mary dropped the phone and fled to her bedroom. But even with the door shut, the blue light still leaked through the crack. She pulled the blanket over her head, pressed her palms to her ears. The air thickened, colder, heavier, until her breath came out in white mist. Then came the sound again. Click, dot. The shutter of a camera. Silence followed. Mary opened her eyes. The phone was on the bed beside her pillow, though she knew she'd left it in the living room. The screen glowed faintly, showing a new photo. Her, lying beneath the blanket, face fully visible. Except in the photo, her eyes were open. Empty. At the bottom of the image, a line of text appeared. "You've crossed over." She hurled the phone to the floor, gasping, but then her own voice, lower and distorted, crawled out of the speaker. "You're here now." Mary clamped her hands over her ears, pressing herself against the wall. The screen flickered, off, on, off again. Each time it lit up, the photo of L changed. His features warped, melted, reformed, until the face on the screen was no longer his. It was hers. The room began to tremble. The air turned icy, as though 1,000 unseen hands were brushing against her skin. The phone hit the floor with a dry crack. Then, total darkness. Only one light remained, the small, flickering glow of the phone screen on the floor. On it, a final message appeared from L. "Welcome home, Mary." "Ali, oh." 3 days later, Mary's apartment was heavy with the smell of damp and cold. The door was still locked from the inside. Neighbors called the police after noticing she hadn't come out, her mail and packages piling up by the entrance. When officers broke in, the apartment was empty. No sign of struggle, no trace of departure. Only silence and a phone lying in the middle of the dining table, its screen still glowing. Tinder was open, but the interface looked wrong. There was no search bar, no carousel of faces, just one full-screen image, the corner of Mary's living room, where she used to sit. The picture was hazy, but the outline of a woman could be seen, her back turned toward the camera. One officer tapped the screen. The image flickered and changed. The next photo showed the same room, now empty, the light fading. Long scratch marks stretched across the wall, uneven and raw, as if gouged by fingernails. At the bottom of the screen, a faint red message appeared. "New match found." The phone was taken to the department's tech unit for analysis. Inside the storage, there was only one folder, named L. Within it were hundreds of photos, fragments of the apartment, The floor, the cabinet corner, the bathroom mirror, the window pane. In some of them, a distorted face could be seen, reflected in the glass, as if pressing from the inside, desperate to get out. A technician opened the final file, maryfinal.jpg. The image loaded slowly, taking over 10 seconds to appear. When it did, the room was completely dark, except for a small light at the center, the glow of a phone lying on the floor. In that faint illumination, a pair of bare feet stood beside it. The face above was hidden in shadow. As soon as the image finished loading, the computer went black. The entire system crashed. Before the power cut completely, one message flashed on the monitor for less than a second. She's not gone. That same evening, at Mary's old apartment, Sarah, her only co-worker, came to pack up her things. The air inside felt strange, heavy. Everything was untouched, except for the cracked mirror on the wall and a faint handprint on the table, as though someone had been sitting there moments ago. Sarah found a second phone, Mary's work phone. The screen was locked, but when she powered it on, there was only one app visible: Tinder. No icons, no settings, just that. She meant to turn it off, but her finger brushed the screen by accident. The app opened instantly. No login required. A single profile appeared. Mary's face, eyes hollow, lips pale. Beneath the photo were the words, "It's a match." Sarah dropped the phone and stepped back. Before it hit the floor, the screen rotated, the front camera turning on by itself. For a split second, Sarah saw her own reflection. Her face stretched, distorted, the eyes sunken deep. She screamed and bolted for the door, but it wouldn't open. The lights dimmed. The only sound left was a soft, constant buzz, vibrating from the phone lying motionless on the floor. When the police returned the next morning to look for Sarah, the apartment was empty again. Everything exactly as before, except for one detail. On the table, a phone rested with Tinder open. The image on screen showed a brighter, cleaner room. Yet in the reflection on the far wall, two silhouettes sat close together, heads bowed toward the camera. The final line pulsed softly on the screen, in rhythm with a heartbeat. "New match found. Nay." A month later, the building where Mary once lived stood abandoned. Locals whispered that every night, a faint light flickered from the third floor, from apartment 3B, the place where she vanished. The night guard claimed he sometimes heard soft laughter and rhythmic knocks echoing through the walls, as if someone were trying to send a message. No one dared to live there anymore. But Mary's story didn't end there. A new Tinder profile appeared online under the name at Mary 3B. Its profile picture showed the corner of a dimly lit room with a silhouette of a woman sitting with her back turned. No bio, no details, just one chilling line beneath it. "Swipe right if you're alone tonight." Everyone who matched with the account vanished within 24 hours. A few friends, driven by morbid curiosity, tried creating fake profiles to investigate. They reported that the moment they hit like, the app's interface changed. No user list, no chat window, only the front camera turning on. In the reflection, they saw themselves, pale, trembling, and behind them, a shadow of a woman slowly moving closer. A software engineer named Ethan decided to dig deeper. He believed it was a sophisticated prank or a viral marketing stunt. He downloaded the suspected version of the app and began decoding its source. Inside a hidden directory, he found a strange line of code, repeated hundreds of times. Merge. Following it were countless image files, each named after a real person, tagged with the date of their last activity. The final file was labeled ethanpreview.jpg. He opened it. The photo showed his own room, captured from an angle where he had never placed a camera. In the image, Ethan sat before his computer, while behind him stood a blurred figure, head tilted, smiling. The lights went out. The screen glowed red. Words began to pulse across it. It's a match. The next morning, when his coworkers visited, Ethan's computer was still running, but his chair was empty. Tinder looked completely normal, except for one small change. The profile at Mary 3B had a new picture. Now, in the ghostly frame, two figures sat side by side, staring directly into the lens. They say that every time Tinder rolls out a new update, the line of code match merge remains. No one knows who put it there. Some claim they've seen Mary's face among their suggested matches. Sunken eyes, cracked lips, a smile torn too wide to be human. But whenever they try to screenshot it, the app instantly crashes. And later, in the inboxes of those who ever matched with her, one final message always appears, no matter how many times they delete the app. You're next. No. In a quiet Pennsylvania town, whispers still linger about an old house built at the end of the 19th century. Beneath its creaking wooden floors lies a bottomless cellar, where darkness swallows every trace of light. Those who dared to descend never returned. Only the echo of footsteps remains, repeating endlessly through the night. The house has changed owners many times, but no one has ever stayed for long. Now, a middle-aged man has moved in, clinging to the hope of a fresh start, unaware that the darkness has been waiting for him. And soon... Arthur turned off the main road just as dusk settled over the town. Autumn in Pennsylvania hung heavy in the air, damp, cold, and pressing down on everything, even his thoughts. The house waited at the bottom of the hill, a hulking shape of darkened timber, its roof sagging beneath the weight of age, its windows rotted and hollow like empty eyes staring into the void. The moment Arthur pushed open the door, he was swallowed by the smell of mildew and rotting wood. The hinges wailed in protest, a long metallic groan, like something grieving. The ceiling loomed high but shrouded in shadow, draped with cobwebs that fell like curtains. The floorboards groaned underfoot, each step echoing far too loudly for the size of the room, as if the house were hollow inside and slowly devouring every sound. He followed a narrow corridor where weak light seeped through dust-streaked windows, revealing peeling paint and dark stains creeping along the walls. The rooms lay abandoned, furniture cloaked in sheets, the chills sinking into his skin. The farther he walked, the heavier the air became, thick and suffocating, as though the house itself breathed at a slower, alien rhythm. At the end of the hallway, he noticed a door smaller than the rest. When he pulled it open, a yawning darkness stared back. A steep wooden staircase plunged downward, its steps slick and blackened with damp. From below drifted a breath of air, cold, earthy, smelling of stone and decay, carrying with it the sense of something endless. Arthur froze, his heartbeat pounding. He snatched a lantern from the hall, its yellow flame trembling as he lowered it toward the stairs. The light reached only the first few steps before being consumed by shadow. The silence below was oppressive, as though even sound refused to exist there. An inexplicable pull urged him forward. Arthur placed his foot on the first step. The wood groaned sharply. Then the sound died into nothing. He descended further, the lantern flickering, casting light on stone walls, slick with moisture. The deeper he went, the thicker the dark became, as if some enormous hand were closing around the space itself. Suddenly, he stopped. A chill threaded its way up his spine, an instinctive warning he couldn't ignore. He lifted his gaze downward and saw only a vast black pit with no end. The lantern flame sputtered, dimmed, and nearly died, leaving him stranded in a suffocating abyss. Heart racing. Arthur turned back and climbed quickly, his breath ragged. When the cellar door shut behind him, the sound reverberated through the house, like the heavy exhale of something ancient and waiting in the dark. He did not know that, with that single step, he had awakened what had been patient for more than a century. Nay, Awims, Deep. The first night in the old house dragged on like a trial. Arthur lay on the sagging wooden bed, the thin blanket useless against the chill that seeped from the floorboards and stone walls. Outside, the wind hissed through cracks in the shutters, but it could not mask another sound, rising from the depths below. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, as though someone were climbing the cellar stairs, one creaking step at a time. Each groan of wood reverberated through the silence, too precise, too human to dismiss. Arthur squeezed his eyes shut, telling himself it was only the timbers settling in the night's cold. But the rhythm was undeniable. He tossed and turned until dawn, when at last the sound dissolved, as if it had never been there. The next morning, Arthur buried himself in chores to shake the unease. He dusted old tables, flung open the windows, let sunlight flood the rooms. Yet no matter how bright the day, the house remained damp and clammy. Out in the yard, he caught the gaze of an elderly neighbor standing motionless, cane in hand, watching. The wrinkled face gave no sign of feeling, only lingering too long on the half-open cellar door before turning away. That wordless glance etched itself into Arthur's mind like a silent warning. On the second night, the sounds returned. This time, they began faintly, as if from some unreachable depth. The measured rhythm struck through bone, louder and longer than before. Arthur sat upright, his pulse racing, listening. The footsteps climbed higher, step by step, then stopped just beyond the cellar door. He held his breath, his body rigid with terror. A dead hush followed. Then, breathing. Heavy, ragged, pressing against the wood. It crawled into his ears, hot and wet, until his skin prickled. Candle in hand, Arthur crept to the hallway. His legs trembled. The flame quivered with each of his own breaths. When his fingers brushed the icy iron handle, the sound cut off at once. He cracked the door open. Nothing. Only a slab of black silence, thick and endless. Yet a blast of frigid air rushed past him, reeking of damp earth and something faintly metallic, almost bloody. He slammed the door shut and leaned against it, heart hammering, listening to the suffocating quiet pressing in from every wall. The days that followed unraveled into fragments. Each night, the footsteps came back. Sometimes near, sometimes far. Sometimes slow, sometimes hurried. Never the same, never predictable. On the longest nights, they endured until morning, leaving Arthur hollow-eyed with exhaustion. The house itself became a chamber of echoes, bending every sound into warped reflections of something colder, crueler. And then, the house began to change. Window frames rattled, though the air outside was still. The walls seemed to flex, expanding and contracting with some uncanny rhythm. Wherever Arthur stood, the sound of the cellar found him, tapping against his thoughts like the heartbeat of an unseen thing. One storm-heavy night, as rain battered the roof, the footsteps grew louder than ever. Arthur strained to catch the rhythm and froze as realization pierced him. The cadence was not random at all. It matched his own, the exact pattern of his descent down the cellar steps that first evening. He understood then. The thing below was not simply climbing upward. It was repeating him, mirroring his every step, calling him back. Arthur fled to his room, but the knowledge gnawed at him. The darkness beneath the cellar had begun to learn his rhythm, and each night it drew closer. Daylight no longer brought comfort. For Arthur, each morning opened only into a hollow stretch of waiting until night. He woke with a gaunt face, eyes ringed in bruised shadows from sleepless hours. Daily routines fell away. Instead, he sat for long stretches in the hallway, eyes fixed on the cellar door, as though it might vanish if he dared to look elsewhere. The staircase seemed to possess its own pull, an invisible gravity. Whenever Arthur closed his eyes, he found himself placing a foot on the first step, hearing the drawn-out groan of wood that never ended. Each night, the footsteps returned, calling him downward. Fatigue, insomnia, and mounting tension twisted into something like addiction. He had to know what waited below. One afternoon, unable to resist, Arthur lit a lantern and opened the door. A rush of cold air surged up, carrying the sour breath of rotting earth. He began to descend, counting each step. 12, 25, 40. The numbers climbed rapidly, but no solid ground appeared. Only darkness thickening around him. He pressed on, shirt damp with sweat, heart battering his ribs. When he finally lifted the lantern, its glow revealed nothing more than a damp wall of stone, water dripping with the slow, steady pulse of a heartbeat. The staircase stretched endlessly downward, no end in sight. The thought of having walked hundreds of steps made his skin crawl. Dizzy, he turned and climbed back up. Yet it took only minutes to return to the door, as though the impossible distance had folded in on itself. Arthur collapsed on the floor, chest heaving. The logic of space had broken. The staircase stretched and contracted at will, a trap that twisted time and distance alike. It did not lead simply into darkness. It bent reality to its own hunger. From that day, Arthur changed. He nearly lived by the cellar door, chair pressed close to the threshold, straining to catch every faint sound rising from below. Outside, the town carried on in the crisp chill of autumn. But inside, time stalled. The air thickened. Silence pressed close like a suffocating fog. One afternoon, a knock came. A tall, severe-faced town inspector stepped inside, moving through the rooms with a notebook, his presence filling the house with uneasy scrutiny. Arthur followed, heart pounding, terrified the man might touch the cellar door. But the inspector left without approaching it, leaving Arthur alone again with the waiting dark. Afterward, the footsteps changed. No longer slow, no longer patient. They grew rapid, frantic, like someone running, always chasing upward from some unseeable depth. Arthur sat entranced, listening for hours, until the rhythm began to sync with his own racing pulse. One night, he gave in. He opened the door and sat on the first step, lantern quivering in his hand. The echoes swarmed, pressing from every angle, impossible to distinguish from his own fevered thoughts. The darkness below swelled, crawling up the steps like a tide of black water. Arthur closed his eyes and saw himself descending forever, never turning back. The staircase had bewitched him, tightening its grip with every hour, every night. The haunting was no longer outside him. It had nested within. Arthur could no longer tell whether he chose to obey or was compelled by something older, deeper. The staircase had become part of him, and he knew, next time, he would not escape. Now, Inuini. The days drifted by in a haze. Arthur gazed at himself in the dust-covered hallway mirror, and the first thing that chilled him to the bone was the eyes. The thing in the mirror stared back at him longer than it should, as if there were a delay. When Arthur tilted his head, the reflection moved more slowly, its eyes faintly glowing with a light that did not belong to him. From that day, the reflection began to reveal subtle differences. Sometimes it smiled faintly while his real face remained expressionless. Sometimes the arm in the mirror moved sluggishly, as if trying to reach out. At night, when candlelight cast shadows on the walls, Arthur noticed that the figure in the reflection stood still when he walked, then vanished entirely for a fleeting moment, leaving behind a chilling emptiness. The whispers from the basement grew louder. At first, they were only indistinct murmurs, but then they became clearer, stretching his name in a heavy rhythm. The walls of the house seemed to pulse like living flesh, with cold air seeping through every crack. The windows were gradually consumed by darkness until daylight was reduced to a thin, pale layer that could no longer penetrate inside. One evening, when Arthur looked out into the yard, he saw his old neighbor stooping beside the fence. In the blink of an eye, a shadowy figure dragged the man toward the basement stairs, vanishing as if it had never been there. Arthur rushed out but found only emptiness, and the basement door stood ajar, trembling faintly as though someone had just touched it. Arthur's mind began to fracture. He saw himself in the mirror, descending the endless staircase, lantern trembling in his hand, eyes hollow. The image repeated, each time deeper, darker, until one night, the reflection no longer followed him. Instead, it stood waiting on the 10th step, turning back with a face identical to Arthur's, but with a void-like gaze, as if inviting him. Arthur felt his body compelled forward. The house was silent, the air thick, every door tightly shut. The staircase yawned open like the mouth of an abyss. His shadow on the wall had vanished, replaced only by the imposter waiting below. Arthur knew that if he stepped down this time, he would never return. But the flame within his heart no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the basement. Arthur no longer resisted. On the final night, he opened the basement door, letting the cold coil around his body like invisible fingers. The staircase stretched before him, black and infinite. The lantern in his hand trembled, its meager light swallowed by the void, leaving behind shadows that expanded and contracted as if they were breathing. He began to descend. The groan of wood echoed, then dissolved into nothing. Each step sank deeper into his body, transforming into an alien rhythm that no longer belonged to Arthur. From the depths, Whispers rose to meet him, merging with his footsteps, forming a ghastly chorus. Time no longer existed. Distance no longer mattered. There was only repetition. Arthur kept descending, counting in his head, but the numbers tangled and slipped away. When he looked up, the stairs still stretched on, endless, without destination. Around him, blurred figures emerged, emaciated, hollow-eyed shades trudging in the same eternal loop. They did not see him. They only continued, trapped like puppets in the punishment of darkness. Arthur realized with sudden horror that the footsteps he had heard night after night were never from another soul. They had always been his own, an echo of himself, bound forever in this warped space, the sound of a destiny already sealed. Panic flared. He tried to turn back, but his legs refused to obey. They carried him downward, steady and unyielding, until his steps blended seamlessly with the eternal echo. The lantern died, plunging him into the infinite pit, where there was no longer a line between man and shadow. By morning, the house was silent. A town inspector stopped by, jotting down notes about a suspicious disappearance. The basement door was closed, dust thick upon it, as though no hand had touched it in years. Arthur was gone without a trace, leaving only the house itself, cold and patient, waiting for the next soul. And at night, those who pass the slope swear they hear sounds rising from beneath the earth, footsteps, slow and deliberate, repeating endlessly, never fading. They say it is Arthur, now part of the basement itself, devoured along with all who dared to gaze into the darkness. Meow. In the backroads of rural Maine, where dirt paths twist into a forgotten valley, there lies an abandoned apple orchard left to rot since the 1970s. The trees stand blackened and skeletal, their brittle branches clawing at the sky like the bones of something long dead. Waist-high weeds choke the ground, and the locals steer clear of the land. At night, between the rows of lifeless trees, a constant murmur drifts through the wind, like prayers swallowed before they can be heard. They say it's the voices of those who vanished there, never to return. Now Eleanor, a woman in her 50s, has come back to reclaim the land that once belonged to her family. Knee. By late afternoon, Eleanor pulled her car to a stop before the rusted gate of the old farm. She stood in silence, staring down the moss-choked path that disappeared into the shadows of the orchard. The two-story wooden house emerged from behind the trees, its roof sagging, windows shattered, the wind whistling through the broken glass like a trapped animal's cry. Eleanor stepped onto the porch, the boards groaning beneath her weight. The smell of mildew and decayed wood invaded her lungs. Beyond the house, the orchard stretched out like a vast graveyard. Hundreds of apple trees stood rigid and blackened, their brittle limbs reaching upward like skeletal hands frozen in prayer. Weeds strangled the roots, spilling across cracked furrows, obscuring the old paths. Yet, amid the desolation, Eleanor noticed something strange. A few branches shivered, leaves clattering together in a dry whisper. But there was no wind. Not even the faintest breath stirred the air. The sound grew sharper, rising like a chorus of murmurs carried from far away, before falling suddenly into silence. At the edge of the orchard, she saw a figure bent low at the base of a tree. A gardener, lean and mud-stained, moving with deliberate patience. He never lifted his head, never showed his face. Eleanor stood frozen, watching until the figure slipped behind a thicket and vanished, leaving only the raw emptiness of the ground behind. Turning back toward the house, Eleanor caught sight of another figure, a minister standing not far away. He paused only briefly, his eyes fixed on the orchard with a gaze that lingered like a warning left unspoken. Then he turned and drifted into the pale gray mist settling over the valley. Dusk drained the light from the sky, and Eleanor realized she was standing alone in the stillness. Not every tree here had withered. At the orchard's center, one apple tree towered above the rest, its leaves vivid, trembling under the last traces of daylight. It looked unnaturally alive, as though the entire orchard's stolen vitality had been poured into this single trunk. The sky collapsed into darkness. Eleanor felt the orchard behind her, vast and gaping, like a black mouth whispering for her to step inside. Ow, many in the dark. A gray dawn bled across the fields, mist curling thick around the orchard, until it looked like a blurred silhouette suspended in silence. Eleanor stepped onto the porch, breathing in the damp chill, her eyes drawn once more to the single green tree at the center. Through the haze, its canopy glimmered with unnatural vitality, weighed down by countless swollen apples. She moved closer, her steps heavy on the wet earth. At the trunk, she realized these were no ordinary fruits. Their skins were misshapen, blistered, bulging with veins that pulsed faintly beneath the surface. Some hung grotesquely large, as though something inside them strained to break free. Eleanor's body recoiled, but her gaze clung to the sight. One apple dropped. The sound was wrong, hollow, echoing like a shell cracking underfoot. Its skin split open, releasing a thick black ooze that spread across the soil. Inside, for an instant, something small and round gleamed. An eye, human in shape, curling in on itself before collapsing into nothing, leaving only a wet stain seeping into the ground. Eleanor clenched her fists, but dared not stoop closer. From deep within the orchard, the murmurs began again. This time clearer, layered with many voices breathing as one, whispering like a desperate prayer. The sound slithered through the brittle branches, coiling along the trunks until it wrapped itself around Eleanor. She felt it crowding her ears, as though unseen bodies had gathered at her side, whispering just beyond her sight. Though before her stood only the corpses of trees. Movement caught her eye. The gaunt gardener had returned, carrying an old wicker basket. He approached the thriving tree and stooped, gathering the twisted fruit as they fell, placing each one gently into the basket. His face remained hidden in shadow, but the slow, deliberate rhythm of his motions carried more of ritual than labor. When the basket filled, he turned and slipped into the rows of dead wood, vanishing without a trace, leaving an emptiness that felt colder than before. The sun climbed higher, but its pale light could not banish the chill. Eleanor retreated into the house, carrying a dread she could not yet name. That night, as she sat alone in the dark, a steady plop echoed from the orchard, the sound of apples striking the ground. They fell in rhythm, each thud mingling with the relentless whispers that threaded through the night, a dirge without end. Eleanor closed her eyes, but the sound clung to her. It crept into her dreams, a voice that did not speak to her, but through her, as if the orchard had found its way into her mind. Ow, Arthur. On the third night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. The valley outside lay in absolute stillness, yet the curtain by her window stirred, as if touched by an unseen hand. In the dark, she heard it, a faint sound at first, like shallow breathing, which slowly unraveled into whispers. They weren't confined to the porch. They seeped into the room, coiling around her bed, slipping into her chest like smoke. She sat upright, her pulse pounding. From the window, the orchard stretched wide beneath the pale wash of moonlight. The dead trees stood rigid, skeletal silhouettes on guard. And in the center, the lone living tree shivered violently, its leaves trembling, though not a breath of wind stirred. The whispers rose into a chorus, hundreds of voices woven together. Some words broke free, clear and sharp. They called her name. Familiar voices, voices she hadn't heard since childhood, voices long buried in memory. Eleanor descended the stairs, the rotted floorboards glowing faintly where the moonlight fell. When she opened the front door, a current of icy air wrapped around her, urging her toward the orchard. Each step sank into the damp earth with a dull, sucking thud, blending with the murmur that thickened around her. It no longer felt like sound. It clung to her, burrowing into her heartbeat, as if someone whispered directly into her ear. At the foot of the green tree, she froze. From its bark bled a viscous, tar-like sap, running down in glistening streaks. The soil beneath the roots pulsed, swelling, sinking, like the breath of something alive. The whispers swelled with it, rumbling through the ground, as though the orchard itself was one colossal, living body. Far off, in the shadows, something shifted. The gardener stood between two rows of withered trees, his narrow shoulders hunched. He didn't approach. He didn't vanish. He simply watched. His silent presence made Eleanor's skin crawl, but the voices at her ear tugged her back toward the roots. When she returned inside, a book waited on the table. Dust filmed the cover, its spine cracked and brittle, yet it lay open on a passage she knew she hadn't touched. Faded ink spelled out fragments, the forbidden fruit, the mingling of blood and soil, the feeding of souls. Eleanor's breath caught. She hadn't left this here. Outside, the whispers pressed against the window panes, hammering every word into her skull. The night stretched long. Eleanor sat awake, rigid, her ears straining. Footsteps circled the house, measured, deliberate. The tread was unmistakable. Her own footsteps, the exact rhythm she had taken through the orchard that afternoon, now played back to her, endlessly, tauntingly. Each time they ceased, the whispers surged louder, faster, more insistent, urging dial, waiting. By dawn, Eleanor slumped in her chair, her body hollow with exhaustion. But she knew the truth now. The orchard had found her. It would never release its call, and the whispers would not stop, not until she stepped deeper into its darkness. Okay. The day dragged on in a haze of exhaustion, yet Eleanor found herself unable to leave the house. Each time the thought of escape flickered through her mind, the whispers rose again, an invisible wall of sound pressing her back. She sat on the porch, eyes fixed on the orchard, watching the brittle branches twitch without cause. By nightfall, the fog rolled in heavy and thick, smothering the path. Moonlight washed the orchard in a pale glow, turning the trees into twisted pillars of bone. Heart pounding, Eleanor stepped into the mist. Her body trembled, but her feet carried her forward, deeper into the maze of dead rows stretching endlessly in every direction. The voices came clearer than ever before. Not just strangers now. Woven among them were the tones she knew by heart. Her father's stern voice, her mother's soft cadence, the faint laughter of her sister, long dead. The sound tangled around her, calling her name, flooding her mind with flickers of memory. Family dinners, warm hands once clasped, now nothing but dust. She shook, but her heart lurched toward them. At the orchard center, she stopped. From the fog emerged figures, blurred at first like vapor, then sharpening into faces. Her father's stern eyes, her mother in her faded dress, her sister with her hair cascading loose. They stood silent beneath the skeletal trees, their skin pale, almost translucent in the moonlight, their eyes bottomless, locked on Eleanor. She staggered back, but the faces did not fade. They drifted with her, step for step, yet no footfalls echoed on the ground. Only the whispers persisted, this time spilling from their closed mouths. Words without meaning tangled into a low, droning chant, warped and endless. In their midst, the lone green tree loomed, its twisted canopy alive with grotesque fruit. Apples glistened in the dark, shining like eyes. One dropped, rolling to Eleanor's feet. Its skin split open, revealing a child's smiling face before collapsing into a slick of black liquid that bled into the soil. The gardener appeared again. This time he was close, standing right beside the living tree. Moonlight carved his gaunt features into shadow and bone. His hollow sockets stared upward, while his thin hands clung to the bark. When his mouth opened, the same whispers poured out, merging seamlessly with the voices of the orchard, as if he too had become one of them. Eleanor realized she was sitting on the cold ground, though she couldn't remember lowering herself. The chill seeped through her dress, her trembling hands resting on her lap. Around her, the faces closed in, slowly leaning nearer, until the icy breath of their skin brushed hers. At the center, the tree quivered, its strange fruit trembling violently, as if feeding on her very presence. Above, clouds devoured the moon, plunging the orchard into suffocating dark. In that moment, Eleanor felt it. The orchard, inhaling, its breath filling her chest, exhaling in unison through her own lungs. The whispers roared in harmony, 1,000 voices braided into one. And for the first time, she understood. It was an invitation, a demand, a promise of reunion forever. And Adi, when dawn never came, the sky hung heavy, thick with a gray so dense it seemed to swallow the light itself. Eleanor sat motionless at the edge of the orchard, eyes locked on the lone green tree that pulsed with unnatural light. Around it, the dead trunks stood in their endless rows, but in the silence, she felt them waiting, as though each rotting vein of wood carried a faint, patient heartbeat. The faces emerged again through the fog. Not just her parents and sister now, but countless others. Strangers with hollow black eyes and sealed lips, their silence taut with demand. Yet, the whispers no longer came from them. They rose instead from the soil, from the roots, from the relentless pounding in Eleanor's chest. Her hand brushed the ground. The earth trembled, yielding soft and damp like living flesh. Beneath the grass, her fingers grazed sharp fragments, small bones, human teeth, rings tarnished with rust. The orchard was not merely dead, it had been fed. Every soul that vanished had seeped into its roots, its fruit, its endless murmurs. At the center, the green tree shuddered, convulsing with hunger. Apples cascaded to the ground, bursting open in wet cracks. Inside lay shreds of dark red tissue, scraps of shriveled skin. The air thickened with the stench of blood and rot. so heavy it clawed at the lungs. Eleanor swayed, her head swimming, yet her feet carried her closer. The faces leaned low, eyes burning with expectation, the circle closing in. They did not move, yet their silence pressed on her, an invisible weight driving her toward the tree. The whispers had become one sound now, a single, drawn-out note vibrating through her skull, a command, a summons to return to the source. She placed her hand on the trunk. The bark was cold, thrumming like a living pulse. In that instant, Eleanor felt herself unravel. Her breath, her blood, her very sense of self seeped downward into the veins beneath the soil. Darkness filled her vision, not with fear, but with a stillness so absolute it seemed to hum with hidden voices. By morning, the gardener stood among the trees, an empty basket in his hands. The green tree was heavy with fruit, its leaves lush, casting a cool shadow over the ground. There was no sign of Eleanor. Only the whispers remained, softer now, as though a new voice had been folded into their song. And from that day on, the orchard grew quieter than ever. But for those who dared to step close and listen long enough, there was always one more note in the chorus of the wind. Nilmende.